Welcome students. I am back with the third lecture, Respiratory System of Chapter 5, Life Process. So students, the topics that will be covered in this lecture are what is respiration, what is breathing, what is the difference between the two, the different types of respiration such as anaerobic and aerobic, aerobic respiration, respiration in plants, how do plants breathe, then respiration in animals such as leech, then your amoeba, frog, and fish. How do these animals breathe? And then the mechanism and structure of respiratory system in human beings. So students, when we start respiratory system, the first thing you need to know is what is respiration. So what is respiration? Respiration is releasing energy from food. That is, to release energy from the food is called respiration. That is, when you feel weak, you take food. And as soon as you take food, you feel energetic. So the energy was released from the food. And this process is known as respiration. Now we have to see or study how it happens. How is energy released? See, now the next important thing you need to learn is that oxygen burns the food. Where? In the cells of the body, and then energy is released. Not only energy, even carbon dioxide and water are produced. But these two are waste products. That is, they are not required by the body and need to be removed or eliminated. Now I said oxygen burns the food, but it is in principle. It is not burning the food as the fire does. It is only burning the food in principle. That is how it is burning. It oxidizes the food to mainly to glucose, and glucose releases energy in a controlled manner. So what is respiration? Releasing energy from food is respiration, and oxygen in the cells burns the food and releases energy. And in this process of respiration, carbon dioxide and water are waste products that are formed and need to be removed or eliminated from the body. So we can say that oxygen oxidizes the food in the cells and releases energy. Now let us discuss and see how it actually happens or how it works. So first we have to know what is cellular respiration. So we all know that our body is made up of cells, and in the cells chemical reactions are taking place, and these chemical reactions are called cellular respiration. Why cellular respiration? Because this chemical reactions that is taking place in the cells release energy, and hence these chemical reactions are referred to as cellular respiration. Why? Because respiration is the process of release of energy, and since these chemical reactions are releasing energy, they are known as cellular respiration. Now this process takes place mostly in the mitochondria, and you have studied in your last class that it is also known as the powerhouse of the cell. Why it is known as the powerhouse of the cell? Because it generates energy in the form of ATP. ATP के फॉर्म में ये एनर्जी जनरेट करता है, इसीलिए इसको क्या कहा जाता है? पावर हाउस ऑफ द सेल. Now the next important event is oxidation of glucose. Now as we eat food, this food is broken down into glucose. which we have studied in the last lecture, is a simple sugar. So now when oxygen will be present, this glucose will react with oxygen and will form carbon dioxide, water, and energy will be released. And now these carbon dioxide and water are waste product. Why it is a waste product? Because it is not required by the body and needs to be eliminated. And so the equation is C6H12O6, which is glucose, which in the presence of oxygen 6O2 forms carbon dioxide and water, and in the process energy is released in the form of ATP. Now the third important event is release of energy. Now we all know that if we lit a fire, it will release energy and immediately you will start feeling the heat and you will get to see the lights. So immediate heat energy is released in the form of heat and light. But the cells do not do so. They release energy gradually. And this energy gets stored in the molecule called ATP. Now what is this ATP? We are so many times we are using this word ATP. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate. And our body uses ATP, that is the stored form of energy in our body, for activities which require energy such as muscle contraction, nerve transmission, and cell repair. Now another important point is that oxygen is very essential for the release of energy. Without oxygen, the body will not be able to break down glucose completely. And when there will be less oxygen and glucose will not break down completely, the cell will shift towards anaerobic respiration. That is, respiration which takes place in the absence of oxygen. Anaerobic respiration, that is the respiration which takes place in the absence of oxygen. And this will decrease the energy that is formed. And it will form lactic acid as a byproduct. And this is the reason why when we do exercise, we start breathing harder. Why? Because less energy is produced, and to supply more oxygen for efficient energy release, we start breathing rapidly. Now, respiration takes place in the body, hence it is called as cellular respiration. Cells of the body. This we have already discussed why it is known as cellular respiration. The reactions that is taking place is known as cellular respiration because respiration is a process which releases energy, and the reactions that takes place in the cells releasing energy is known as cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration is common to all living organisms. It takes place in every organism. Whether it is a dog, whether it is an insect, whether it is a bird, in every living organism, cellular respiration takes place. And what is the purpose of respiration? Providing energy to cells. Now, two byproducts of cellular respiration are formed, that is carbon dioxide and water. Now, carbon dioxide is a waste as it is harmful to the organism and needs to be removed, and it is need to be removed from the body. Although water is also formed as a waste, but it is beneficial as it is not harmful. It is not harmful, rather it is beneficial. So next important topic is glycolysis. What is glycolysis? Glycolysis is the process in which glucose is broken down to produce energy and produces two molecules of pyruvate, ATP, NADH, and water. So what is glycolysis? Glycolysis is the process which breaks down glucose, releasing energy, and it takes place in the cytoplasm. So where does glycolysis takes place? Glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm of the cells. You all know that the eukaryotic cell is the structure of the eukaryotic cell having a nucleus in the center, and this is the cytoplasm, which contains most of the organelles, and the nucleus having the DNA and the chromatin material. So this glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm. Now we will discuss what is the difference between breathing and respiration. ब्रीदिंग और रेस्पिरेशन में क्या डिफरेंस है? तो देखिए, ब्रीदिंग ये वो मैकेनिज्म है जिससे कि हम ऑक्सीजन को एटमॉस्फेयर से लेते हैं और कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड को रिलीज करते हैं. कहाँ पे? एटमॉस्फेयर में. अगर आप थोड़ा सा गौर करें तो आप देखेंगे कि आप क्या, सभी लोग, जितने लोग भी इस लेक्चर को सुन रहे हैं, वी ऑल आर टेकिंग इन ऑक्सीजन एंड रिलीजिंग कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड. और इसमें थोड़ा सा अगर आप ध्यान दें तो आप ये भी नोटिस करेंगे कि आपकी रिप्स बाहर आ रही हैं, अंदर जा रही हैं. दैट इज, इट इज अ फिजिकल प्रोसेस इन्वॉल्विंग मूवमेंट्स ऑफ व्हाट? ऑफ योर रिप्स. तो जैसे ही आपकी रिप्स बाहर आती हैं, वहां की कैपेसिटी बढ़ जाती है और लंग्स एक्सपैंड कर जाते हैं. और डायफ्राम क्या होता है? फ्लैट हो जाता है, जो कि वैसे क्या है? एक डोम शेप्ड स्ट्रक्चर है, इस तरीके का. तो यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है कि यहाँ पे लंग्स, रिप्स और डायफ्राम का मूवमेंट हो रहा है, जिसकी वजह से वी आर एबल टू टेक इन ऑक्सीजन from the atmosphere and release out carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Thus, it is a physical process. So, what is breathing? Breathing is simply a mechanism or a physical process by which we take in oxygen from the atmosphere and release carbon dioxide. Whereas, what is respiration? Respiration is a dual process. That is, it involves breathing as well as the oxidation of food in the presence of oxygen in the cells, which is a biochemical process. Now, what is a biochemical process? Biochemical, that is reactions taking place in the mitochondria of the cells where the food is oxidized. Now, what do we mean by oxidize? That is, in the presence of oxygen, the oxygen reacts with the different components of the food such as carbohydrates, proteins, and breaks it down and releases energy, and this energy is important for the maintenance of life and the survival of the animal. So now let's revise the difference between breathing and respiration. Breathing is a physical process, whereas respiration is a biochemical process. It is confined to certain organs, as I told you, lungs, ribs, and diaphragms, whereas respiration takes place in all the cells. We use energy for breathing, whereas in respiration, energy is released in the form of ATP. Now, breathing is an extracellular process, that is, it takes place outside the cell, whereas respiration is an intracellular process, takes place in the cells. Breathing is intake of oxygen and removal of carbon dioxide, whereas respiration is oxidation of food to form carbon dioxide, water, and release energy. So this is the difference between breathing and respiration, and this is very important question for your exams, as it is many times asked to differentiate between breathing and respiration. Now, one more thing, important concept, that is respiration is opposite of photosynthesis. How? In respiration, we use oxygen and release carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Whereas in photosynthesis, the products that are formed in respiration are used. In photosynthesis, Carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of light energy is used and it releases oxygen. Whereas in respiration, oxygen is used. So we can clearly understand that photosynthesis is opposite of respiration. How? Because the product of respiration is the substrate of photosynthesis, whereas the product of photosynthesis is the substrate for respiration. Now, the energy which is released during respiration is stored. As in the previous slide, I told you that if we lit a fire, energy is instantly released in the form of heat and light. But that's not in the case of cells. In the cells, the energy is released whenever it is required by the cells of the body. So what happens to the energy release? It gets stored in the form of ATP molecules. That is adenosine triphosphate. Now, why do we call it ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate? Just see the structure. What are you? This is the structure of ATP. So it consists of three parts. First, the nitrogenous base, that is adenosine. Then this is the ribose sugar, and this is the three phosphate groups. We can name it as 1, 2 or 3, or we can name it as alpha, beta and gamma. So this is the nitrogenous base adenine. This is the ribose sugar, and these are the three phosphate groups which are attached to it. This is why adenosine triphosphate. Tri means three and phosphate means groups, phosphate groups. Now what happens? Each time the phosphate group breaks, it releases energy. So now if it breaks, it will release energy and ATP will be broken down to form ADP, that is adenosine diphosphate, that is having two molecules of phosphate. Now again, when energy will be required, this second phosphate group will break, release energy, and ATP will form AMP, that is adenosine monophosphate, that is mono means one group of phosphate. So adenosine diphosphate, that is ADP, has a lower energy content as compared to ATP. Definitely, because it is having two phosphate groups, and each phosphate group is releasing energy. So it is having one phosphate group less than ATP, so it will have less energy. Now, what is this inorganic phosphate? This is a substance which contains a phosphate group that is made up of phosphorus and oxygen, and it is represented by the symbol Pi, where I is for inorganic. So AMP is one phosphate group, ADP is two phosphate group, and ATP is three phosphate group. The lesser the number of phosphate group, the lesser will be the energy. So the energy released during respiration is utilized to make ATP molecules from ADP and inorganic phosphate. See, ADP, and this is a phosphate, and this energy will be utilized and phosphate will get attached to the adenosine diphosphate and form a triphosphate, and this is stored in the cells for future use. So students, ATP has three main parts, and this is adenosine nitrogenous base, ribose sugar, and three phosphate groups. Now the nitrogenous base, that is adenine, it is a purine base with amino group, and this is responsible for the adenosine part of ATP. Responsible for adenosine part of ATP. Now pentose sugar, this is the pentose sugar, which you can see is a ribose sugar. Why? Because there is OH group at the second carbon, and if it would have been a deoxyribose sugar, then hydrogen would have been present instead of OH. The three phosphate groups. The three phosphate groups, this is the first one, second one, and third one, are bounded by phosphoanhydride bond, which is a high energy covalent bond. And how is this formed? By condensation between two phosphate groups with a loss of water. So phosphoanhydride bond, it is formed by the condensation of two phosphate groups with a loss of water. And these bonds are highly negatively charged and cause electrostatic repulsion and thermodynamically unstable in aqueous solution. So whenever water is added, so the phosphoanhydride bond, what will happen? It will be broken by the addition of water. You can see here ATP plus water forms ADP, and the phosphate bond is broken and energy is released in the process. So these conditions, that is strongly negatively charged, thermodynamically unstable, this all favors the breakdown of ATP. So now what is the functional significance of this structure? The bonds between the phosphate groups store large amount of chemical energy, and when it is hydrolyzed, this energy is released. Now students will summarize all we have studied in the last two previous slides, that is AMP. AMP, its full name is adenosine monophosphate. Number of phosphate groups attached is 1. Energy content is very low, and it is the basic nucleotide with one phosphate group. Now ADP, that is adenosine diphosphate. Di means two, phosphate, that is it will be containing two phosphate groups. Energy content is low and it is formed when ATP loses one phosphate group. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Tri means 3, that is it is having 3 phosphate groups. Energy content very high, and it is the main carrier of energy inside the cells. And the Pi, that is the inorganic phosphate, where I stands for inorganic. It is the phosphate group itself. It does not store energy, and the free phosphate group contains phosphorus and oxygen, and it is used to form ATP. ATP is the energy currency of the cell. So whenever a cell requires energy, ATP will be broken down, and the reaction is known as hydrolysis reaction. ATP breaks down into ADP and phosphate, and in this process energy is released. So the energy released per mole of ATP hydrolyzed is 30.5 kilojoules, and this energy is used to drive the endothermic processes in the cell, such as muscle contraction, conduction of nerve impulse, protein synthesis. Now what about other energy requiring metabolic reactions? For that, the ADP absorbs energy and gets converted back to ATP, and this will be further utilized for these reactions. Now glucose and respiration. Glucose is a 6-carbon simple carbohydrate, and it is oxidized in cells during respiration to release energy. Now one molecule of glucose is broken down into two molecules of pyruvate or the pyruvic acid through the process of glycolysis. So here you can see this is the process of glycolysis, in which one molecule of glucose is broken down into two molecules of pyruvate or the pyruvic acid, and this entire process is known as glycolysis. Glycolysis is a common initial pathway. Initially, glycolysis will take place, and in glycolysis, 6 carbon molecule, that is glucose, will be converted to pyruvate, which is a 3 carbon molecule. Here you can see glucose, a 6 carbon molecule in the cytoplasm of the cell, and breaks down into pyruvate, which is a 3 carbon molecule. Now this occurs in the cytoplasm, releases a small amount of energy, and does not require oxygen. And this is a common initial pathway, that is, it will take place in all living cells. Now once pyruvate is formed, it will undergo three pathways. One, in the absence of oxygen. In case of yeast, what happens? It breaks down to form ethanol, which is a 2 carbon molecule, carbon dioxide, and releases energy. So since ethanol is formed, it is also known as alcoholic fermentation. And lack of oxygen in case of human beings, such as in muscle cells, when we do rigorous exercise, there is a shortage of oxygen, and in the lack of oxygen, pyruvate breaks down to form lactic acid, which is a 3 carbon molecule, and release energy. Now this lactic acid is actually responsible for muscle fatigue, the pain that we feel after doing rigorous exercise is due to the accumulation of lactic acid. Then in the presence of oxygen, pyruvate, now in the presence of oxygen in the mitochondria, it will break down to form carbon dioxide, water, and energy will be released. Now the process which takes place in the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen is the most efficient pathway, because this releases the maximum amount of energy. Now, glycolysis is a universal process, and it determines the pathway for the pyruvate formation. If less energy is produced, it is mostly due to fermentation, and in the aerobic respiration, it produces maximum energy. Now, students, I have covered the important points we have studied so far in a tabulated manner, and which will be easy for you to revise. That is, between the aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So see, aerobic respiration, and this is anaerobic respiration. Now what is the oxygen requirement? Aerobic respiration uses oxygen, whereas anaerobic means in the absence of oxygen. Process: in the aerobic respiration, glucose is completely oxidized to carbon dioxide and water, whereas glucose is broken down partially. Now energy yield: in aerobic respiration, considerable amount of energy is produced and is stored as ATP. Anaerobic produces very less energy and little ATP is formed. ATP produced per molecule of glucose, 38 ATP, and in anaerobic respiration, 2 ATP. So you can see the difference, 38 and 2. So this is why we say that aerobic respiration produces more energy and anaerobic produces less energy. Aerobic respiration takes place in the mitochondria of the cell, whereas anaerobic respiration takes place in the cytoplasm. End products of aerobic respiration are carbon dioxide, water, and energy is released. And anaerobic respiration, the end products depends on organism. If it is a yeast or in plants, then the end product will be ethanol, carbon dioxide, and little energy will be produced. And since ethanol or alcohol is formed, it is known as alcohol fermentation. In muscle cells, the product formed will be lactic acid and little energy will be produced, and this is known as lactic acid fermentation. Examples of aerobic respiration: most of the organisms, including humans, and anaerobic respiration takes place in yeast, some bacteria, muscle cells during heavy exercise. And what is the special term for aerobic respiration? None. And anaerobic respiration, it is known as fermentation, that is alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation. This is a small experiment to demonstrate anaerobic respiration in yeast. So what we do is we prepare a sugar solution and add yeast to it. Then we close the container, and after some time a smell will develop in the container, and the odor is due to ethanol or the ethyl alcohol that is formed and released during the process. So when this gas is passed through lime water, the lime water becomes milky, indicating carbon dioxide, because you all know that the end product of anaerobic respiration is, that is, pyruvate breaks down into ethyl alcohol and CO2, and energy is released. So ethyl alcohol, the smell is of ethanol or the ethyl alcohol, and the gas, that is carbon dioxide, when passed through lime water turns it milky, and lime water turning milky proves or indicates the presence of carbon dioxide. Anaerobic respiration in muscles. Anaerobic respiration occurs in human muscles during intense physical activity. So what happens during intense physical activity? The oxygen becomes insufficient, and so muscles switch to anaerobic breakdown of glucose to release energy. And in the muscles, what happens? Anaerobic breakdown of glucose will, that is pyruvate will break down to form lactic acid, and energy will be released. So this lactic acid will lead to muscle cramps, and the hot water bath will help improve blood circulation and reduce the cramps by clearing the accumulation of lactic acid. Now we will discuss about respiration in plants. Plants use oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Just like animals, they also use oxygen and release carbon dioxide. So all parts of the plant, like roots, stems, and leaves, carry out respiration individually, unlike animals. That is, unlike animals means here every part is carrying out respiration, whereas in animals only there is a respiratory system which performs the respiration. That is, in animals the body acts as a single unit, and plants have limited transport of respiratory gases, so each part is individually carrying out respiration. In animals, gases are transported over long distances through specialized systems. Now we will discuss the difference between photosynthesis and respiration. Photosynthesis is common to all green plants which contain chlorophyll, whereas respiration is common to all living things, whether it is a plant or whether it is an animal. In photosynthesis, food is synthesized. Light energy, carbon dioxide, and water in the presence of chlorophyll synthesize food. And in respiration, food is oxidized. Photosynthesis, energy is stored, and in respiration, food is oxidized to release energy. Photosynthesis is an anabolic process, that is building up. It is a building up process as it forms food, whereas respiration is a catabolic, that is breakdown, because the food molecules are broken down to release energy. Cytochrome is required in both because it helps in the synthesis of ATP. It is an endothermal process. And respiration is a exothermal process. That is, energy is released. Whereas endothermal process, energy is utilized. Photosynthesis, it comprises products such as water, oxygen and sugar. Whereas in respiration, the product formed are carbon dioxide and hydrogen, and energy is released. Radiant energy, that is the light energy, is converted into potential energy. And in case of respiration, potential energy is converted into kinetic energy. Photosynthesis occurs during daytime in the presence of sunlight only, whereas respiration is a continuous process taking place all through the lifetime. Respiration in plants takes place through leaves, lenticels, and roots. Here you can see the transverse section through the leaf, and on the lower side you can see these are openings known as stomata through which the gaseous exchange takes place. These are lenticels. Lenticels are small, raised, oval or lens-shaped areas present on the bark of woody stems, and they replace stomata and and are responsible for exchange of gases. Now this is root. You can see these are root hairs, and there are spaces between the soils which are present, and in these spaces uh, the space is occupied by water, and when these water enter the roots, it takes in dissolved oxygen, and the carbon dioxide from the cells are also eliminated out in these spaces. So the gaseous exchange also takes place through the root hairs. Now respiration in leaves. Leaves are the main site of gaseous exchange in plants. They contain small pores which are known as stomata, and these pores open and close to regulate the movement of gases. While photosynthesis takes place only during the day, respiration occurs throughout the day and night. Now, stomata allows oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse in and out of the leaf tissues. So, the gaseous exchange takes place through the stomata. They open during the day for photosynthesis but still permit respiration at all times. Now, the pattern of gaseous exchange depends on whether photosynthesis is occurring. During the day, photosynthesis takes place in the presence of sunlight. So oxygen is produced as a byproduct, and the leaves use some of this oxygen for respiration. Carbon dioxide produced during respiration is immediately used in photosynthesis. As a result, there is almost no net exchange of gases. Oxygen and carbon dioxide balance each other. Right? Now what will happen during the night? Photosynthesis will not occur because light is absent. So no oxygen is produced at night. Leaves absorb oxygen from the air for respiration, and carbon dioxide released from the respiration diffuse out of the leaf. There is clear net gaseous exchange at night. Oxygen enters and carbon dioxide leaves. This is why we don't go under the trees at night, because they release CO2. Now, structures for gaseous exchange. Leaves contain tiny pores called stomata for the gaseous exchange. Time of respiration, both during day and night. Relation with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis occurs only during the day, but respiration is continuous. Now, photosynthesis occurs during day but does not occur during the night time. Oxygen production. Oxygen is produced during the daytime, but it is not produced at night. Source of oxygen for respiration. During the daytime, leaves use the oxygen produced during photosynthesis, but at night, since photosynthesis does not take place, leaves use oxygen from the air. Now, the carbon dioxide produced is used in respiration is used up in the process of photosynthesis, and carbon dioxide from respiration diffuses out because photosynthesis is not taking place, hence CO2 will not be used. Minimal net exchange because oxygen and carbon dioxide balanced by the process of photosynthesis. Oxygen diffuses in and carbon dioxide diffuses out as photosynthesis does not take place, and so oxygen will have to be taken from the air and carbon dioxide will have to be diffused out. Respiration in stems. Stems also exchange gases like the leaves, and they have small pores. You can see here, these are the small pores which are called lenticels, and these lenticels allow the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Here you can see the transverse section through the lenticels, and they remain open continuously and facilitate respiration even in mature woody tissues. And lenticels are visible as small raised spots or slits on the bark of trees. You can see they are spots, raised spots, or some are even visible as slits. Respiration in roots. Roots also carry out respiration, although the mechanism differs. Why? Because the roots are embedded in the soil and they depend on the air entrapped in these soil particles for respiration. So what happens is air remains present in the air spaces you can see in this figure between the soil particles. Now roots absorb oxygen from this air by the process of diffusion, and carbon dioxide produced during respiration is released back into the soil. Roots epidermal cells extend outward to form root hairs. You know that this is the main root, and roots have side roots which are known as root hairs. So uh, these root hairs increase the surface area for the gaseous exchange and helps the root to absorb oxygen more efficiently. This you can see, these are the secondary root hairs. Now what will happen if there is waterlogging? Roots require a constant supply of oxygen. But if the soil is overwatered or there is waterlogging for longer periods, water fills the spaces between soil particles and displaces the air. Oxygen then becomes unavailable to the roots, and the roots switch to anaerobic respiration. And you know, anaerobic respiration will lead to the formation of alcohol, and the accumulation of alcohol is toxic and will kill the plant. Waterlogging is therefore a major cause of plant death in poorly drained soils. And to overcome this, what do we need to do? We need to do tilling of the soil. Tilling का मतलब हुआ गुड़ाई करना. जैसे हम लोग गमलों में गुड़ाई करते हैं, जिससे क्या होता है कि एयर अंदर एंटर कर जाती है बिटवीन द सॉइल पार्टिकल्स, क्योंकि सॉइल लूज हो जाती है और सॉइल के लूज होने से एयर एंटर कर जाएगी एंड द प्लांट्स विल गेट ऑक्सीजन. And one more important information you need to know, students, is that plants do not have a very much requirement of oxygen. Why? Because every part is individually taking part in respiration, and as such most of the cells in the central part of the stem is dead cells which are only for vascular conduction. So as such the requirement of these gaseous exchange is very less in plants as compared to animals. Now we will discuss about respiration in animals. Now the common features of all respiratory organs, कोई भी respiratory organs हो, उनके कुछ characteristics होते हैं जो common होते हैं. जैसे कि लार्ज सरफेस एरिया, इनका जो सरफेस एरिया होगा वो एक्सटेंसिव होगा, जिससे कि मैक्सिमम गैसियस एक्सचेंज हो सके, ऑक्सीजन एब्जॉर्ब हो सके और कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड एलिमिनेट हो सके। इनकी वॉल्स कैसी होंगी? थिन होंगी, पतली होंगी। अगर मान लीजिए वो बहुत मोटी होती हैं, थिक होती हैं, तो गैसेस एक्सचेंज पॉसिबल नहीं हो पाएगा। इसलिए रेस्पिरेटरी सरफेस कैसा होगा? थिन होगा, जिससे कि इजिली गैसेस डिफ्यूज कर सकें। फिर रिच ब्लड सप्लाई, this will be the third characteristics wherever applicable. So in animals that rely on blood for gas transport, वहां पे जो रेस्पिरेटरी ऑर्गन्स हैं वो सराउंडेड होंगे ब्लड वेसल्स से. They will be richly supplied with abundant blood vessels because exchange will take place via blood. So there needs to be the presence of blood vessels. So features common to all respiratory organs are large surface area, thin walls, and rich blood supply. Respiration in animals. Different animals evolve different methods of respiration depending on their structure, body structure, and habitat, that is where they are living. Like fish lives in water, it has gills, and cow living on land, that is the terrestrial animal, has lungs for respiration. So we'll begin with unicellular organisms such as amoeba. It directly respires through the body surface. You can see oxygen diffusing in through the membrane, cell membrane, and carbon dioxide diffusing out. So directly through the body surface of the animal. And no specialized respiratory organs are present. Respiration in leech. Leech respires through the skin, which is thin, moist, and supplied with blood vessels. Oxygen diffuses in through the skin and enters the bloodstream, and carbon dioxide, which is produced during respiration, is carried back by the blood and expelled out through the skin. This is effective because leech live in moist environment that supports cutaneous respiration. What do we mean by cutaneous respiration? That is, respiration through the skin is known as cutaneous respiration. So what actually happens is that the body surface of the leech is covered by thin film of water, and oxygen dissolves in this water and diffuses across the skin into the blood. If the skin dries, respiration becomes inefficient or stops. Respiration in earthworm. The skin of the earthworm is thin, moist, and richly supplied with blood vessels, which makes it efficient respiratory surface. So here you can see a section through worm's skin, and these are the cells, and these are the blood vessels. And these blood vessels bring in carbon dioxide, which diffuses out, and the oxygen diffuses in. So what happens is oxygen, which is dissolved in soil water, diffuses through the moist skin into the blood vessels. And the blood then carries this oxygen to all blood cells where it is used for respiration. Now, the product of respiration will be carbon dioxide, and this will diffuse from the tissues into the blood and move to the skin, and from the skin carbon dioxide will diffuse out into the surrounding soil. Respiration in fish. Fish, we all know, lives in aquatic habitat, and the specialized organ for breathing are the gills, which are adapted for respiration in water. Now the fish takes water through its mouth and forces over the gills. So students, what happens is that in the pharynx region, on the lateral sides are opening, which is known as operculum, and there are gills. These are the gills you can see here. These gills, and you can see the blood vessels entering the gills. Now, water is taken through the mouth and it comes out through the pharyngeal openings. And while the water moves through the pharyngeal opening, it bathes the gills. And when the water bathes the gills, that is, bathes, or we can say that is, passes over the gills, then these blood vessels exchange then between the blood vessels and the water, the gaseous exchange takes place. That is, the oxygen content is high in the water, which will move into the blood vessels. You all know that the gas moves from higher pressure to the lower pressure. So the content of oxygen in the blood vessels is low. So the gas will move from higher pressure to lower pressure and will diffuse into the blood vessels. And in the blood vessels, the pressure of carbon dioxide is high. So it will move towards the lower pressure, that is, it will move into the water, and thus carbon dioxide is eliminated and carbon dioxide is diffused in the blood vessels. And these blood vessels then carry the blood to all parts of the body. Now the membrane of the gill is thin and gaseous exchange occurs, and the continuous flow of water ensures a steady supply of oxygen. Because this water is taken in and moved over the surface of the gills is a continuous process. This is taking place continuously. And the surface area of the gills is also large and they are richly supplied with blood vessels. Thus, it is an efficient organ of respiration in case of aquatic animals. Respiration in insects. So insects like grasshoppers, आपने देखे होंगे grasshoppers, cockroach, mosquito, इनमें ट्रैकियल सिस्टम होता है रेस्पिरेशन के लिए. अब ये ट्रैकियल सिस्टम क्या होता है, देखिए ये टाइनी ओपनिंग्स दिख रही हैं आपको. ये जो टाइनी ओपनिंग्स हैं बॉडी सरफेस पे, इनको कहा जाता है स्पाइरिकल्स. इनको क्या कहा जाता है, स्पाइरिकल्स. और इनसे जो होती है एयर वो एंटर करती है बॉडी में. ठीक है, गॉट इट. कि ये जो टाइनी ओपनिंग्स हैं बॉडी सरफेस पे, इनको कहते हैं स्पाइरिकल्स और इनसे एयर एंटर करती है बॉडी में. अब ये जो नेटवर्क है एयर ट्यूब्स का, इनको कहा जाता है ट्रैकिया और ये ट्रांसपोर्ट करते हैं गैसेस को डायरेक्टली टू द ब्लड टिश्यूज. ये देखिए नाउ, अब ये जो है इनका एक ट्यूब होगा, नेटवर्क होगा. दीज ऑल आर ट्यूब्स, नेटवर्क थ्रू व्हिच ऑल दीज स्पोर्स आर कनेक्टेड. और इस ट्यूब में से गैस हर एक बॉडी टिश्यू में पहुंच जाएगी. इसको कहा जाता है ट्रैकियल ट्रांसपोर्ट. अब इस ट्रैकियल ट्रांसपोर्ट से क्या होता है कि बहुत रैपिड डिफ्यूजन हो जाता है गैसेस का विदाउट इन्वॉल्विंग ब्लड. ब्लड की जरूरत नहीं है और रैपिड डिफ्यूजन हो जाता है. रेस्पिरेशन थ्रू लंग्स. Amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and humans. These all animals respire through lungs. Air enters the lungs and oxygen is absorbed and passed into the bloodstream. Now, blood transports oxygen to tissues and carries carbon dioxide back from the tissues, and carbon dioxide is expelled through the lungs. Now, frogs are a bit different. Why? Because in the larval stage, that is the tadpole of the frog, breathes with gills, as it is purely completely aquatic, and the adult frog respires through skin and lungs. Skin, that is cutaneous respiration, and lungs. And in water they undergo cutaneous respiration, and on land they use lungs for respiration. Now we will discuss about respiration in humans and its mechanism. So the cellular level of respiration, this takes place inside every cell of the human body. And the oxygen which is absorbed during breathing is transported by the blood to all the tissues, And inside cell, oxygen helps to break down food molecules to release energy. This cellular breakdown of food is the true process of respiration. And this we have already discussed in the previous slide. Now, human respiratory organs. Humans respire through lungs, and the lungs are the main respiratory organ. And gaseous exchange between air and blood takes place inside the lungs. That is, the exchange of gas takes place between the lungs and the blood vessels. Now, oxygen diffuses from air into the blood, and carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the air. And this exchange keeps the oxygen level in the blood stream adequate for cellular activities. So you can see here, this is the respiratory organ of humans. So first is the mouth, nasal opening, and this is the nasal passage. Then air can enter through the mouth as well as the nasal opening, and through the nasal passage it reaches the pharynx, then larynx, and then this is the trachea. And from the trachea, air enters the bronchi, because trachea gets divided into two halves, right and left, and this right and left are known as bronchi, and the bronchi enters the lungs. And then bronchi are further divided into bronchioles, and bronchioles ultimately branch into alveolar sac. This is, you can see alveolar sac, these are alveoli, and it is actually the alveoli where the exchange of gases takes place. So air, when enters through the nasal opening and passes through the respiratory tract and through the bronchi and bronchioles, it reaches the alveoli. This is surrounded by, this you can see, this is the structure of alveoli. Alveoli is surrounded by this blue blood vessels, that is the veins. This is the pulmonary artery carrying the deoxygenated blood, and this is pulmonary vein carrying the oxygenated blood. Because you all know that pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries the deoxygenated blood to the lungs, whereas pulmonary vein is the only vein that carries oxygenated blood to the heart. Now, the air, after passing through the respiratory tract and the bronchi, bronchioles, reaches the alveoli. Alveoli is a sac-like structure. It is very thin, and you can see that is, it is highly, it appears grapes-like. So the surface area is increased because of this, and these sac-like structures are thin, surrounded by blood vessels, and it is where the actual exchange of gases takes place. So you can see the deoxygenated blood that comes from all parts of the body has higher concentration of CO2 and lesser concentration of, or we can say higher pressure of carbon dioxide is in the blood, and the pressure of the oxygen is low. So the gas, you all know, passes from higher pressure towards the lower pressure. So the carbon dioxide moves into the alveoli from the blood vessels, and in the alveoli the pressure of oxygen is greater, whereas in the blood vessels it is low. So the oxygenated blood will move from the alveoli into the blood vessels, and in the blood we all know that hemoglobin is present. So the oxygen binds to hemoglobin and is carried to the different parts of the body. Structures supporting breathing. There are two structures, rib cage and diaphragm. You can see in this picture, this is the rib cage, and the rib cage encloses and protects the lung. Not only lungs, it also protects the heart, and it forms the upper part of the chest cavity. And at the bottom of the cavity is a curved sheet of muscle which is known as diaphragm. You can see this is the curved sheet of muscle. So rib cage consists of ribs and intercostal muscles. Inter means between and costal means ribs. That is muscles present in between the ribs. So in between each ribs are present the muscles which are called intercostal muscles. And these play a very important role in breathing. Now diaphragm. Diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscular sheet at the base of the chest cavity, and its movement, that is, it will become flat and it will again resume the dome-shaped structure. So this change or the movement changes the volume of the chest cavity and brings in air, and it also leads to the expulsion of air from the lungs. So breathing involves coordinated movement of both the rib cage and the diaphragm. So I again repeat, breathing involves coordinated movement of both the rib cage and the diaphragm for the air to move in and out of the lungs. Now, what is breathing or the breathing movement? Breathing includes inhalation and exhalation. So, one breathing is equal to one inhalation plus one exhalation. Inhalation क्या होता है? Taking in air into the lungs. और exhalation क्या होता है? Expelling out the air. और ये movement depend करता है on the movement of the diaphragm and on the movement of the intercostal muscles of the ribs. तो देखिए, सबसे पहले इन दोनों को समझते हैं क्या होता है इनहेलेशन और एक्सहेलेशन. इनहेलेशन इज टेकिंग इन ऑफ एयर, टेकिंग इन एयर. तो अब आप थोड़ा सा फील करिए, एयर को इनहेल करिए, अंदर की तरफ सांस लीजिए और फील करिए कि आपकी रिब्स मूव किधर कर रही हैं. तो देखिए क्या होगा कि जब हम एयर को, जो डायफ्राम और जो मसल्स होती हैं विच आर अटैच्ड टू द रिब्स, ये कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करती हैं. कॉन्ट्रैक्ट का मतलब होता है शॉर्टन. अब ये जब शॉर्ट होंगी तो ये खींचेंगी, और खींचेंगी तो क्या होगा, रिब्स बाहर की तरफ मूव कर जाएगी और डायफ्राम, जो डोम शेप डायफ्राम था, जब ये पुल होगा तो ये क्या हो जाएगा, फ्लैट हो जाएगा. ठीक है, क्या हो जाएगा, फ्लैट हो जाएगा. और इसकी वजह से क्या है कि ये जो वॉल्यूम है चेस्ट कैविटी का, मतलब चेस्ट कैविटी एक्सपैंड कर जाएगी, और एक्सपैंड करेगी तो अंदर का जो वॉल्यूम है वो क्या हो जाएगा, इंक्रीज कर जाएगा. वॉल्यूम तो इंक्रीज करेगा, लेकिन जैसे ही वॉल्यूम इंक्रीज कर जाएगा जो एयर का प्रेशर है वो क्या हो जाएगा, डिक्रीज कर जाएगा. और आपको पता है एयर कहां से कहां मूव करती है, एयर ऑलवेज मूव्स फ्रॉम हायर प्रेशर टुवर्ड्स द लोअर प्रेशर. तो हायर प्रेशर कहां है, एटमॉस्फेयर में. तो एटमॉस्फेयर से ऑक्सीजन रेस्पिरेटरी ट्रैक्ट के थ्रू होते हुए कहां आ जाएगी, लंग्स में आ जाएगी जहां पे प्रेशर कम है. और एल्वियोलाई will get filled with fresh air containing oxygen. So it is very simple. The muscles attached to the ribs contract and the diaphragm also contracts, and this leads the ribs to move outwards and diaphragm to become flat. This increases the chest volume of the chest cavity, but the air pressure decreases and air moves from outside to the inside, that is in the lungs, because air always moves from higher pressure to the lower pressure. Now we come to exhalation. Exhalation क्या होता है, सांस को बाहर निकालना. अगर आप ब्रीद आउट करते हैं तो उसे कहा जाता है एक्सहेलेशन. अब आप इसको भी महसूस करिए एक बार, बाहर की तरफ सांस लीजिए. अब आपने सांस लिया होगा तो आपने देखा होगा कि आपकी रिब केज जो था वो अंदर की तरफ मूव किया था. क्यों, क्योंकि इंटरकोस्टल मसल्स रिलैक्स हो गई. अब अगर इंटरकोस्टल मसल्स रिलैक्स हो गई तो मींस द मसल्स विल कम टू इट्स ओरिजिनल पोजीशन. तो रिब केज क्या होगा, डाउनवर्ड मूव कर जाएगा और अंदर की तरफ मूव कर जाएगा. डायफ्राम रिलैक्स हो जाएगा, जैसे ही रिलैक्स होगा वो फिर से डोम शेप्ड हो जाएगा. ये बिल्कुल इसी तरीके से जैसे मान लीजिए आपने एक रबर बैंड लिया, किनारों से उसको खींचा तो वो फ्लैट हो गया, और जब उसको ढीला छोड़ दिया तो वो फिर से कर्व्ड हो गया. तो उसी तरीके से डायफ्राम भी रिलैक्स कर जाएगा, और फिर जैसे ही वो रिलैक्स करेगा वो फिर से अपनी ओरिजिनल पोजीशन पे आ जाएगा, दैट इज इट विल बिकम डोम शेप्ड. और जो वॉल्यूम है चेस्ट कैविटी का वो क्या हो जाएगा, डिक्रीज हो जाएगा। और जैसे ही चेस्ट कैविटी का वॉल्यूम डिक्रीज होगा, एयर प्रेशर क्या हो जाएगी, इंक्रीज कर जाएगी, बढ़ जाएगी। और फिर बढ़ गई तो अब क्या हुआ, लंग्स में प्रेशर ज्यादा है, तो एयर किधर से किधर मूव करती है, फ्रॉम हायर प्रेशर टू दी लोअर प्रेशर। तो क्या होगा, जो लंग्स में एयर है दैट इज कौन सी एयर है, ऑक्सीजन तो है नहीं, कौन सी है, कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड है। अब वो क्या होगा, वो रेस्पिरेटरी ट्रैक्ट के थ्रू बाहर आ जाएगी एंड दिस इज नोन एज एक्सहेलेशन। Now let us discuss about respiratory system in humans. It is made up of several organs which are working continuously to supply oxygen in the body and remove carbon dioxide from the body. So the main organs are nose, nasal passage, pharynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs. That is nose, nasal passage, pharynx, trachea, bronchi, and lungs. You can remember this so that you don't forget any of these organs. So you can see this is the nose having nostrils, and this is the nasal passage. After the nasal passage, it opens into the pharynx region, pharyngeal region. Pharyngeal region takes into the trachea, and then trachea divide into bronchi, that is right and left bronchi. Bronchi enters the lungs and further divides into finer branches known as bronchioles, and bronchioles enters the alveoli. So these are the main organs of respiratory system and also the diaphragm. Now let us discuss the different parts of the respiratory tract. First comes the nose. नोज में क्या है, दो ओपनिंग्स हैं जिनको कहा जाता है नॉस्ट्रल्स, और एयर एंटर्स थ्रू दीज नॉस्ट्रल्स, सिंपल। नेजल पैसेज, अब नॉस्ट्रल्स के पीछे जो पैसेज है उसको कहा जाता है नेजल पैसेज, एंड ये माउथ कैविटी से सेपरेटेड होता है किससे, एक हार्ड बोनी प्लेट से जिसको कहा जाता है पैलेट। अब थोड़ा सा आप फील करिए, आप अपनी टंग से अपनी रूफ को छुइए, माउथ के रूफ को छुइए, मुंह के अपर 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 सरफेस या रूफ को टच करिए जरा, देख रहे हैं ये हार्ड प्लेट लाइक स्ट्रक्चर फील हुआ, इसी को कहा जाता है पैलेट। अब ये क्या करता है, ये माउथ कैविटी दैट इज द ओरल माउथ कैविटी को नेजल कैविटी से सेपरेट करता है, इसीलिए हम वी आर एबल टू ब्रीथ एंड ईट एट द सेम टाइम। अब नेजल पैसेज एक और इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले करता है, दैट इज क्लीनिंग द एयर, क्योंकि इसमें फाइन हेयर होते हैं एंड इट ऑल्सो सिक्रीट्स म्यूकस। तो जो डस्ट पार्टिकल्स एयर से एंटर करते हैं वो इन हेयर और म्यूकस में क्या होते हैं, ट्रैप हो जाते हैं एंड डज नॉट एंटर द लंग्स। अब नेक्स्ट पार्ट आता है फेरिंग्स। फेरिंग्स थ्रोट का वो हिस्सा है जो माउथ और विंड पाइप के बीच में, विंड पाइप मतलब ट्रैकिया। तो अब देखिए, दिस इज माउथ कैविटी एंड दिस इज ट्रैकिया, तो ये जो रीजन है थ्रोट का दिस इज नोन एज फेरिंग्स, और यहां पे एयर और फूड दोनों ही एंटर करते हैं, ये कॉमन पाथवे, ठीक है। तो फ्रॉम द फेरिंग्स, अब फेरिंग्स में जो एयर आएगी वो तो चली जाएगी ट्रैकिया में, और जो फूड आएगा वो मूव कर जाएगा ईसोफेगस में। लेकिन जो फेरेंजियल रीजन होता है ये कॉमन पाथवे है जहां पे एयर भी आती है, फूड भी आता है। एयर आती है तो वो ट्रैकिया में एंटर कर जाती है और फूड एंटर कर जाता है किसमें, ईसोफेगस में। नेक्स्ट पार्ट इज ट्रैकिया। So the air from the pharynx enters the trachea, commonly known as windpipe. Why? Because it is a tube-like structure and the air passes through the windpipe and enters the lungs. Now trachea is supported by rings of cartilage. इसके चारों तरफ कार्टिलेजिनस रिंग्स होती हैं। ये बिल्कुल उसी तरीके से है जैसे कि आप ने पेन में रिफिल देखी होगी, रिफिल के चारों तरफ स्प्रिंग लगी होती है, तो उसी तरीके से जो ट्रैकिया होता है उसके चारों तरफ कार्टिलेजिनस रिंग्स होती हैं। तो इसका फंक्शन क्या होता है, ये विंड पाइप को कोलैप्स यानी कि गिरने से बचाती है, मींस कि व्हेन द एयर प्रेशर विल चेंज, तो ऐसा ना हो कि ये कोलैप्स कर जाएं, गिर जाएं, जिससे क्या होगा, ब्रीदिंग नहीं हो पाएगी। सो टू प्रिवेंट इट फ्रॉम कोलैप्सिंग एंड टू मेंटेन इट्स स्ट्रक्चरल इंटीग्रिटी, इसका स्ट्रक्चर मेंटेन करने के लिए ये कार्टिलेजिनस रिंग्स होती हैं। अब एक और स्ट्रक्चर आता है लैरिंग्स, जो ट्रैकिया का अपर पार्ट होता है और इसको वॉइस बॉक्स भी कहा जाता है, और यहीं से साउंड प्रोडक्शन होता है, राइट। एंड फ्रॉम द लैरिंग्स द ट्रैकिया रन्स डाउन द नेक, नेक से होते हुए टू स्मॉलर ट्यूब्स में डिवाइड कर जाता है, और इन टू स्मॉलर ट्यूब्स को कहा जाता है ब्रोंकाई। यू कैन सी हियर द राइट एंड द लेफ्ट ब्रोंकाई. Now we studied in the previous slide that the trachea divides into right and left branches known as bronchi. इसका singular होता है bronchus. Now the two bronchi are present in humans. Humans में दो bronchi होते हैं, one right and one left. And these tubes carry air deeper into the lung tissues. अब ये air को कहाँ ले जाती है? ये air को कहाँ ले जाती है? Lungs में ले जाती है. अब लंग्स जो है कहाँ पे होता है ह्यूमन बॉडी में? चेस्ट कैविटी, या जिसको हम कहते हैं थोरैसिक कैविटी. तो एक तो देखिए हमारा नेक हो गया, दैट इज सर्वाइकल रीजन. नेक के नीचे हमारा आ गया थोरैसिक कैविटी, उसके बाद एब्डोमिनल कैविटी. तो दिस थोरैसिक कैविटी और द चेस्ट कैविटी इज वेयर द लंग्स आर प्रेजेंट. और ये एब्डोमिनल कैविटी से किसके थ्रू सेपरेटेड है? डायफ्राम. यू कैन सी this is the diaphragm, and this separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. अब हर एक लंग कवर्ड होता है टू थिन मेम्ब्रेन्स, जिनको कहा जाता है प्लूरा. व्हाट इट इज नोन एज प्लूरा. और ये मेम्ब्रेन्स क्या करती हैं? लंग्स को प्रोटेक्ट करती हैं, और ये फ्रिक्शन को रिड्यूस करती हैं ड्यूरिंग ब्रीदिंग. ड्यूरिंग ब्रीदिंग क्योंकि लंग्स क्या होते हैं? एक्सपैंड होंगे, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट होंगे, तो जो फ्रिक्शन होता है उसको रिड्यूस करती है. एंड लंग्स कहाँ प्रेजेंट होते हैं? विद इन द रिब केज, एंड दिस प्रोटेक्ट्स इट फ्रॉम इंजरी. अब इनसाइड द लंग्स ब्रोंकाई फर्दर डिवाइड इनटू स्मॉलर ट्यूब्स, एंड these are called as bronchioles. इनको क्या कहा जाता है? हर एक ब्रोंकाई जो है वो फर्दर और स्मॉलर ट्यूब्स में डिवाइड कर जाएगा, which are known as bronchioles, और ultimately the bronchioles will form air sacs which are known as air sacs called alveolar sacs, and these are known as alveoli where the actual gaseous exchange takes place. तो अब देखिए हम आते हैं नेक्स्ट पार्ट, दैट इज bronchioles and alveoli. अब जैसे ये आप देखिए ट्रैकिया दिख रहा है इस फिगर में आपको. ट्रैकिया डिवाइड कर गया दो ब्रांचेस में, राइट एंड लेफ्ट ब्रोंकाई या ब्रोंकियल ट्यूब्स, एंड दिस ब्रोंकाई फर्दर डिवाइडेड इनटू स्मॉलर ट्यूब्स कॉल्ड ब्रोंक्यूल्स. ब्रोंक्यूल्स और ब्रोंक्यूल्स जो है ये स्मॉलेस्ट ट्यूब्स हैं इनसाइड द लंग्स. कौन सी? ब्रोंक्यूल्स. और ब्रोंक्यूल्स के एंड पे क्या प्रेजेंट है? ये देखिए एंड पे क्या प्रेजेंट है? टाइनी पाउच. पाउच मतलब बैग. तो दीज आर पाउच लाइक एयर सैक्स. पाउच लाइक स्ट्रक्चर्स होते हैं जिनको कहा जाता है एयर सैक्स, एंड दीज एयर सैक्स आर नोन एज एल्व्यूलाई. अब एल्व्यूलाई जो है ये सराउंडेड होती है ब्लड कैपिलरीज से, और इसका सरफेस एरिया भी बहुत ज्यादा होता है, क्योंकि आप देखिए हर एल्व्यूलाई एक सैक लाइक स्ट्रक्चर बना रहा है, दैट इज नोन एज एल्व्यूलाई. तो इस सैक लाइक स्ट्रक्चर से क्या सरफेस एरिया नहीं बढ़ गया? यस, डेफिनेटली. This formation of sac-like structure at the end of each bronchioles will increase the surface area. And what characteristics did I tell you about the respiratory surface? That is, it should be thin, it should have large surface area, and it should be surrounded by blood capillaries. So you can see all the three characters are present here. It is actually very thin. These air sacs are thin, they have large surface area, and they are surrounded by blood capillaries. These blue and red are the blood capillaries. Now, and alveoli is the actual site where the gaseous exchange will take place. So, ऑक्सीजन फ्रॉम द इनहेल्ड एयर, जो हमने सांस लिया था, उससे जो ऑक्सीजन आई अंदर और आके एल्वुलाई में कलेक्ट हो गई। ठीक है, अब क्या है, यहाँ पे ब्लड वेसल्स है। ब्लड वेसल्स क्या लेके आए? कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड लेके आए फ्रॉम द डिफरेंट टिश्यूज। तो ब्लड वेसल्स में CO2 ज्यादा है, का प्रेशर ज्यादा है, और एल्वुलाई में किसका प्रेशर ज्यादा है? ऑक्सीजन का। तो क्या होगा, हायर प्रेशर से लोअर प्रेशर के थ्रू मूव की तरफ मूव करेगा। तो एल्वुलाई से ऑक्सीजन किधर चला जाएगा? ब्लड वेसल से में, और ब्लड वेसल से कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड किधर आ जाएगा? एल्वुलाई में आ जाएगा, और इस तरीके से गैसियस एक्सचेंज हो जाएगी। लेकिन क्या ब्लड में ऑक्सीजन किसी से बाइंड करेगा? यस, इट विल बाइंड विद hemoglobin and will be taken to different cells for cellular respiration. अब ये जो कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड यहाँ इकट्ठा हो गई, इसका क्या होगा? तो द कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड दैट एंटर्ड द एल्वुलाई, अब क्या होगा कि एक्सहेलेशन का प्रोसेस होगा। तो अब आप याद करिए क्या होगा एक्सहेलेशन में। एक्सहेलेशन में होगा मसल्स रिलैक्स कर जाएंगी, तो रिब्स क्या होंगी? डाउनवर्ड्स मूव कर जाएगी। डायफ्राम क्या होगा? डोम शेप्ड हो जाएगा, और लंग्स का प्रेशर इंक्रीज कर जाएगा, क्योंकि जो थोरैसिक कैविटी है वो क्या हो जाएगी? उसका वॉल्यूम कम हो जाएगा। वॉल्यूम क्यों कम हुआ? क्योंकि रिब्स इनवर्ड्स मूव हुई, डायफ्राम अपवर्ड्स, दैट इज अगेन डोम शेप्ड हो गया। तो इससे क्या हुआ? जो थोरैसिक कैविटी है उसका वॉल्यूम कम हो गया, और वॉल्यूम कम होने से लंग्स कंप्रेस हो गए। अब लंग्स कंप्रेस हुए तो लंग्स के अंदर का प्रेशर क्या हुआ? बढ़ गया, और गैस किधर से किधर मूव करेगी? फ्रॉम हायर प्रेशर टू लोअर प्रेशर। तो एटमॉस्फेयर में प्रेशर क्या हो गया? लो हो गया एज कंपेयर टू लंग्स, और इसलिए कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड क्या होगा? एक्सहेल आउट हो जाएगी, बाहर निकल जाएगी। सो दिस इज हाउ द एक्चुअल प्रोसेस ऑफ रेस्पिरेशन टेक्स प्लेस। तो बच्चों, इस तरीके से हमने इस लेक्चर में ये जाना कि रेस्पिरेटरी सिस्टम के कौन कौन से डिफरेंट पार्ट्स हैं, एनिमल्स और प्लांट्स में किस तरीके से रेस्पिरेशन होता है, और ह्यूमन बींग्स के रेस्पिरेटरी ऑर्गन्स और उसकी मैकेनिज्म के बारे में जाना। आई होप इट इज क्लियर टू यू। थैंक्स फॉर वॉचिंग।